Exactly a month to the day since little Gus Lamont vanished in the state's outback, new theories have emerged about just how far he might have gone.
An expert from Flinders University suggesting he may have ventured well beyond the area that's been extensively searched.
The sun has gone down on two large-scale searches for little Gus Lamont, now missing for exactly a month. Police and volunteers have covered a 6-kilometre radius from the homestead near Yunta where he was last seen. But according to some experts, he could have got much further.
Over a 3-day period, potentially somewhere between 3 to 8 kilometres.
He was last seen at 5 p.m. on September 27 by his grandma playing out the front in sand while his mum and other grandparent tended to the sheep. Police have been working on one theory, that he simply wandered off. And with no access to water, food or shelter, it's unlikely he survived.
If the child would be able to access some sort of moisture or dew or moist leaves, then that could increase it somewhat beyond the 3 days.
It's hoped the hat or the Minions shirt Gus was wearing may have been discarded if he was lost, confused and possibly dehydrated. Police are in the final stages of assessing hours worth of drone footage taken at the property using infrared technology to pick up any clues. At this stage, there are no further searches planned, but detectives haven't ruled out returning.
I know that there is still work that is ongoing within South Australian Police. They continue to make inquiries into a few different sources of thinking, but I'm not in a position to comment on it beyond that.
But he may have not gone far at all if he was too scared to move.
I think that fear would be an absolute factor, and that would impact on the ability to move and mobility, but also around finding shelter.
But right now there is no trace and no answers, just mystery. Hannah Ford, 7 News.
On the late afternoon of September 27, 2025, 4-year-old Augustus Gus Lamont was playing near the family homestead at Oak Park Station, a remote property around Yunta. According to family accounts, he was last seen at about 5 p.m. near a dirt mound where children often play. By roughly 5:30 p.m., when relatives called him in, he was nowhere to be found. That narrow gap, a handful of minutes in which a child vanished from familiar ground, became the hinge on which weeks of searching, scrutiny, and controversy turned. This report pulls together the facts we know, the questions that remain, and why geography, timing, and community behavior matter so much when the smallest details can change everything. Gus's disappearance began as an ordinary scene of rural life, kids playing near the homestead while adults attended to chores. Those domestic routines provide context for investigators because they shape how supervision is exercised on a station. In many rural settings, children play freely near the house under the informal watch of adults who trust the land and the rhythms of daily work, a contrast to the closer supervision common in towns and cities. That cultural space helps explain why a child might be allowed to play unsupervised for short periods and why a lapse of 30 minutes could occur without immediate alarm. But 30 minutes in a remote, exposed landscape is not a small window. It is the span that can erase tracks, shift thermal signatures, and allow a child to venture beyond sight lines. The simplicity of that first moment, a child on a mound, the sun angling low, is the only fixed point investigators have as they try to reconstruct what came next. Immediately after the family reported him missing, a massive search operation unfolded. Over the first days, more than 100 personnel were involved at times, and aerial support was used to extend reach and visibility. Helicopters scanned from the air, drones attempted thermal sweeps when conditions allowed, state emergency service teams and volunteers walked grid lines, and trained Aboriginal and civilian trackers examined subtle ground disturbances. The reported area covered in those searches was enormous, roughly 60,000 hectares. A measure of how quickly remote country can become complicated to search. That scale matters because even with dozens of people walking lines every day, the odds of missing a faint sign increase when the backdrop is featureless scrub and shifting sand. Volunteers and local residents played a central role, bringing manpower and local knowledge that public agencies could not quickly duplicate, yet that same human traffic risked confusing fragile traces. The sheer breadth of effort underscores both the urgency and the limitations authorities faced in the earliest response. Despite that massive effort, the ground returned only one small, child-sized footprint, a single impression logged about 500 meters from the homestead. For volunteers and family, that print offered a momentary surge of hope. Maybe a trail could be followed. For investigators, that single print raised immediate questions. Was it recent? Was it authentic? Did it form part of a sequence? And had it been contaminated by subsequent foot traffic? Outdoor impressions are fragile evidence. Wind can soften edges within minutes, animals can distort the pattern, and multiple passes by searchers can obliterate context. Forensic teams photographed the impression, attempted to cast it where possible, and compared its dimensions to known samples, but ultimately the print did not produce the kind of unambiguous sequence that would confirm a path of movement. As a solitary piece of physical evidence, it was important, but insufficient on its own to determine definitive movement or outcome. Given the limited physical findings, police eventually scaled back visible search operations. That decision inflamed public anxiety, volunteers felt deflated, families feared abandonment, and social media spun with conjecture. Operationally, though, a scaleback is a common, if painful, choice. After exhaustive sweeps that produce no fresh leads, commanders face a trade-off: continue to send people repeatedly over terrain that increasingly loses the traces they might be trying to find, or transition to a different phase of the response, one centered on investigative follow-up, forensic analysis, and intelligence gathering. In Gus's case, police reallocated resources toward evidence review and interviews with witnesses, neighbors, and family members. That administrative shift does not mean an end to the search in spirit. It means the approach changes. Where boots and eyes comb terrain for immediate rescue, investigators will pursue timelines, phone and vehicle metadata, verified tips, and anything that can tie human movement to the brief minutes that matter. Experts and searchers disagreed publicly about critical questions. Did Gus remain on the station, hidden in scrub or a shallow depression, or did he move beyond the areas initially swept? Some trackers argued that the land is forgiving of small movements and can conceal a child within a short distance. A hollow under spine effects, a drainage line, or a rocky break can hide small body heat and complicate aerial detection. Others pointed out that the property's grazing patterns, fence lines, and nearby tracks made certain escape corridors more or less likely, and that the absence of debris or further prints beyond the solitary impression suggested that he may not have wandered far. These differing expert interpretations are not evidence of incompetence. They are an honest reflection of how complex reading a landscape can be. Each perspective offers value. Trackers emphasize microterrain that machines miss, while aerial analysts and technicians emphasize patterns that can be picked up from above. Reconciling those views is necessary but difficult when time erodes the scene. Investigators have been careful to keep multiple hypotheses active. Early on they listed wandering as a plausible scenario, a curious child following a small animal trail or running toward a distant sound, and they examined environmental dangers such as exposure, hidden water, and uneven terrain. Third-party involvement has also been treated as a testable hypothesis, prompting canvassing for unfamiliar vehicles, interviews with passers-by, and checks of alleged visitors. Police additionally followed lines of inquiry related to family dynamics: who was present, how supervision was exercised, and whether any inconsistencies in recollection or movement needed further clarification. The key here is methodical testing. Each hypothesis must be measured against physical evidence, digital traces, and corroborated witness accounts. That discipline avoids premature closure of the case while ensuring that resources are focused on the avenues most likely to yield actionable information. Public silence from key family members altered the social texture of the inquiry. Gus's father, who lives some distance away, declined to speak to media, and that refusal, perfectly lawful and sometimes wise, fueled speculation among observers wanting immediate answers. Silence in high-emotion cases is often interpreted as secrecy, yet investigators caution against reading public comment as evidence. People respond to trauma in different ways. Some seek the spotlight for help, others withdraw to protect privacy and to cooperate privately with authorities. What matters to detectives is verifiable detail, timestamps of calls, vehicle movements, and any recorded footage. The public appetite for statements can easily conflate privacy with guilt. That is a distortion that does harm by shifting attention to personalities rather than to facts that can solve a case. Digital noise complicated the factual record. In the modern era, missing person cases quickly attract social media speculation, AI-generated images, and false leads, and Gus's case was no exception. Manipulated photos and unverified tips flooded platforms, forcing police and fact-checkers to spend time debunking claims rather than chasing useful leads. That noise matters. It distracts investigators, exhausts volunteer goodwill, and amplifies the emotional burden on a grieving family. Authorities repeatedly urged the public to forward any timestamped images or dashcam footage directly to police rather than posting unvetted material online. Those official requests are not about controlling narrative, they are practical triage. Verified digital evidence can be immediately integrated into timelines, while viral misinformation wastes resources. Despite the strain, community volunteers, vigils, and advocacy sustained pressure and support for the family. Neighbors and organized groups kept walking lines for as long as morale held. Local churches and community centers hosted vigils and provided meals for searchers and police. Online advocacy groups helped keep the story visible to a wider audience. That community engagement is morally important and operationally helpful. It provides manpower, local knowledge, and emotional support. But it also requires careful coordination with authorities to avoid contaminating potential evidence and to ensure volunteer effort is productive. Community mobilization is one of the strengths in rural inquiries. People know their land and their neighbors, yet it must be channeled to preserve the integrity of the investigation. What does all this mean in practice? A few clear lessons emerge. First, remote terrain makes exhaustive searches both essential and difficult. They must be broad in scope but also aligned with careful evidence preservation practices. Second, a single footprint, however poignant, cannot determine a definitive movement or outcome. It is a starting point, not a conclusion. Third, when visible searches are scaled back, investigative intensity should increase. Forensic review, timeline reconstruction, and digital data analysis become the primary tools. Fourth, public speculation and unverified digital content risk harming families and muddying the investigative trail. Verified, time-stamped evidence is the real currency investigators need. Finally, community engagement, when coordinated with authorities, remains crucial for tips, moral support, and keeping a case alive in the public eye. The disappearance of 4-year-old Gus Lamont is a story of small, urgent facts and large, difficult silences. A child was last seen playing at a sand mound. Within 30 minutes he was gone. A massive search covered tens of thousands of hectares and involved hundreds of boots and aerial assets. Only a single, inconclusive child-sized footprint was found. The official visible search phase was later scaled back as investigators shifted to forensic and intelligence work. Experts disagreed about whether Gus stayed on the station or moved beyond search zones. Family silence and online misinformation complicated public understanding, and community volunteers and vigils sustained the search's moral momentum. If you can help, the most useful things are simple. Check any timestamped photos or dashcam footage you have from that date and area. Note the exact time and location of any unusual vehicle or person you remember, and pass that information directly to the police handling the case rather than posting it online. Keep the family in your thoughts without rushing to judgment. The path from questions to answers is often built from patient, verified details, one small piece at a time.